Welcome everyone, and hello and thank you for joining us today. I am Jackie Brenner, a pre-med student who has enjoyed meeting other STEM students from around the world through my TikTok and Discord STEM Potential. I can't believe it's been almost a year now since we've started STEM Potential, which is an online Discord that provides a network for all students to share their unique perspectives from diverse backgrounds to create strong connections and more. With over 12,000 students from over 105 different countries, Discord members can act as mentors and mentees as they progress along the stages of their education while also finding friends with common interests. I would like to give a special shout out to all members of the STEM Potential team for working so hard to help put this together and make it possible. I created these STEM Potential webinars in order to combat the lack of mentorship and representation that I noticed in the STEM fields. Lastly, I want to introduce Ashini. She is the Vice President of STEM Potential, who I met through the 7-year BSMD program at Penn State and Jefferson, and is now a first-year medical student and was on one of our webinars yesterday. I could not embark on this journey without her, and I feel so fortunate and proud to have her as my best friend. We will both be moderating this session and the other sessions this weekend. I am proud and humbled to have assembled a group of incredibly successful medical students. Please note that today we are sharing students' opinions and advice about the medical school admissions process. We have not received any direct information from admissions departments, nor are we an official accredited business in this space. This session will be highlighting 4 medical students from Duke that all have unique perspectives and stories on how they were accepted into medical school. And I want to start off by allowing each panelist to give a brief 2 to 3 minute introduction. And Cameron, you can start us off.
All right. Hey, everyone. My name is Cameron Thompson. I'm a first year at Duke School of Medicine right now. So I am originally from Ashburn, Virginia. It's kind of right outside DC. And I went to Duke for undergrad. I majored in biology, minored in chemistry, got involved in some health policy work, also did some cardiology related like pathophysiology research. Let's see, also kind of involved in the arts, and really excited to talk to you guys today. I will kind of pass it off to Alyssa.
Hi, everyone. My name is Alyssa. I am originally from Miami, Florida. I'm a Cuban-American girl raised there. And that has played a strong influence into who I am and my journey here. Like Cameron, I am a first-year med student at Duke. And prior to coming here, I received my bachelor's in applied physiology and kinesiology over at the University of Florida. And then I took an untraditional route by attaining a master's degree here at Duke. I did a master's in biomedical science and then took a gap year off in between before starting med school. So I'm happy to chat about what that experience was like and all the steps that required me taking a gap year and what that looked like. Definitely in undergrad, I had to be employed. So I had a job the entire time. And definitely that played a big role into my application cycle and me deciding to then take a gap year afterward. So I'm happy to be a part of this and excited to work with all of you.
Awesome. Thank you for that introduction. Maybe Sage, you can go next.
Yes, hello everyone. My name is Sage. I am also a first year at Duke School of Medicine. Before Duke, I actually went to community college for 2 years and then transferred to the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, and got my bachelor's degree in biology there. I went, I guess you could say, straight through undergrad and started Duke this year. But before college, I grew up in a small town in North Carolina of like 1,000 people. So definitely living in Durham is a big city compared to where I'm from. But yeah, I'm happy to talk about community college and transferring and going from community college to university to med school, or any of those kind of questions.
Awesome. Well, thank you. And last but not least, Gabby.
Hi guys, my name is Gabby. I'm also a first year medical student at Duke. I I was born and raised in Iowa City, Iowa. So I moved over to the East Coast for undergrad, where I went to Johns Hopkins University. I studied neuroscience and music, so I was pretty involved in music. And then I ended up taking kind of a non-traditional route to medical school. I graduated a semester early and then moved to Brazil, where I have family, and stayed there for about 8 months, and then came back to the US and worked at an education nonprofit for 2 years, actually. I ended up deferring my acceptance to medical school to stay on for another year. So I'm happy to talk about any of that, about gap years, about deferring, about moving from, like Sage, I'm from Iowa, so I grew up in a pretty small town, and it was a big culture shock to come to the East Coast. So yeah, excited to talk to you guys and hear your questions.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys for those amazing introductions. Definitely all coming from different places, different backgrounds. So excited to dive into the actual application. But before we get to that, I wanted to just ask the general question: why did you pick Duke, and what extracurriculars are you involved in? So we get a little bit more information about that. Maybe Alyssa, you can start us off.
Sure. So I think I'm unlike the rest of my cohort here. I chose Duke twice, because I chose Duke for my master's program and then later chose it for med school. And I think one of the reasons why I chose Duke was because of the diversity of the class. I knew that they were going to be creating an environment that was just going to be intercultural, as well as provide experience dealing and really collaborating with peers that are from every community that you can imagine. So race, gender, LGBTQ status, et cetera. And all of that was very important for me because I figured, coming from Miami, I actually came from a pretty homogenous environment. And I wanted to ensure that my medical school experience would be as diverse as possible. I also knew that being at Duke, I was going to have as much preparation as they can give me to make it into my residency of my choice. And I knew that that was going to be an important thing for me. I'm interested in what would be considered a very competitive specialty. So as a result, like, it's important to set yourself up for success. And I knew that at Duke I would be. So that's basically a succinct answer, and I hope that that helps. I'll pass it on to Sage.
So I was already kind of familiar with the Durham area because I went to UNC Chapel Hill, which is 10 miles down the road. So it was kind of nice having the option to stay in this kind of general area where I've already been familiar and having friends and family in this area. So I thought that would help my transition to med school. But Duke specifically, the reason I chose Duke, a big reason for me was I was very unsure of what I wanted to do in medicine. And I think one thing that's really unique about Duke is our curriculum is pretty different than most in that we do our preclinical year in 1 year. Then we do that during first year. So we kind of condense down the first 2 years of med school into 1 year. Then our second year is our clinical year, our clerkship year, where we're on the wards and seeing patients. Then our third year, Duke gives us an entire year for research or to get a dual degree. So that gives us a lot of flexibility to kind of explore our interests and have kind of an extra year after clinical rotations to, see what our interests were and kind of reflect on that before we have to go right into residency applications. And I think that extra time is going to be really valuable for me. And I've already been able to use this year to kind of do some shadowing and start thinking about the things I'm interested in. And I'm really excited for next year for that reason too. And then I think it takes a lot of the pressure off if you do decide later that you want to do something maybe a little bit more competitive after rotations. You have that entire year to do research and build connections and things like that. So those for me were the big reasons that I came to Duke. And I think that, Jackie, the second part of the question was what extracurriculars we're involved in. Was that right? Okay. So I have been doing a little bit of research during first year. I was on a pediatric neurosurgery research project. I'm definitely not interested in neurosurgery. It just kind of happened. And I finished that project now and considering taking on another research project. And then extracurricular wise, I'm part of a program called Hotspotting, where we kind of work with what are deemed as high utilizers of the emergency department and kind of help them navigate outpatient care and try to find ways to keep them out of the emergency department and receive higher quality care that way. But other than that, I think I do a lot of mentoring for undergrads. But other than that, I think those are the main extracurriculars I've been involved in so far in the first year. I don't know if Alyssa, you want to answer the second part of the question.
Yeah, I mean, I'm involved in a bunch of things. I would say I'm on the executive council for LMSA, so our Latino Medical Student Association. I'm the culture chair. I'm also involved in the student government of our class. So both me and Cam have different vice presidential roles within our own class. And then I'm involved in a nutritional supplementation program outside of the university. So basically, we're partnered with patients that require some sort of nutritional support, and I'm part of that program. So, and I also enjoy the musical and artistic aspects of life. And so both me and Cam are participating in our school's parody musical later this year. So we'll both be taking on that as another extracurricular. All right, Cam, your turn.
Yeah, so I think the first question was why I chose Duke. For me, the third year opportunity was a huge one. I knew that I really liked Durham just from undergrad, and I knew I loved the Durham community and the Duke community. But I was kind of like, I knew that I wanted to be in Durham, but I was also hesitant about just staying in the same place and not being able to explore anywhere else. And so having the whole third year to ourselves to even like travel abroad or go anywhere that we want in the country to do research, that opportunity was super attractive. Because I was like, I can't stay in the same location and still get experiences elsewhere. I thought that was great. And then I also, I really like the, at Duke University, our different graduate schools are really well connected. Like there's a lot of interdisciplinary work that's done here. I kind of got a taste of that in undergrad, just seeing we have this like health innovation sort of research center, and just seeing how they worked a lot with the medical center, and then also with like the public health school, and just like seeing everything is like right down the road from each other, and they really do interact a lot. So I liked that aspect of the university community. And then also I was kind of interested in surgery coming into med school. And so I knew that there were a lot of like really amazing surgeons at Duke, and I'd be exposed to like really, I guess, interesting cases, just the nature of Duke being kind of like a place where people go to with complicated cases and things like that. So just knowing that I would have interesting like clinical experiences here was a big draw. And I think those are like the major points for me. I was already like very comfortable with Durham and Duke, and I figured the transition to med school would be a lot easier and smoother, staying in a familiar environment. As far as what I'm involved in, I am also part of Hotspotting, which Sage kind of explained before. And then as Alyssa alluded to, I'm part of the student council. So I'm the community service chair, just trying to find events out in the community to get students involved in. And then the student faculty show as well, which is like our musical. And then lastly, I'm part of SNMA, the Student National Medical Association, which is a group for individuals that are underrepresented in medicine, just to find like support, networking. So we have events pretty frequently for that. Oh, and then most recently I joined the Aspires program, which is just exposing underrepresented people in medicine to mentorship in surgery specifically. So yeah, I'll let Gabby round us up.
Thanks, Cam. Okay, so why did I choose Duke? I chose Duke for A couple like very specific reasons. I think the most general one when I was making my decisions was I, to be fully honest, did not have a good time in undergrad. Like my undergrad was really, really a struggle for me. And I think that I wanted to find a medical school where I was really like comfortable and happy in the community specifically, because I just didn't find a good community when I was in undergrad. So I really prioritized finding a medical school that, like, number one, cared about me as an individual and as a student, and number two, had other people in it, like in the class, that were supportive and uplifting and just, created a good, strong community. And I definitely found that at Duke. I noticed that when we were, interviewing, people would be like, good luck, as like you went into the interview room. Like people really were like very like collaborative and supportive, and I really appreciated that. So that was kind of my baseline criteria, like you need to meet before I'll like consider this as a medical school. And then things that were like very specific to Duke, I really like the 1-year curriculum. And I think that was a big draw, because I know that like I'm a very hands-on learner. Like I want to be in the hospital. I want to be working with patients, like applying this stuff that we learn in the classroom, and having the classroom part of medical school condensed into 1 year instead of 1.5 or 2 years, like is more traditional, was a huge draw for me. And then the 3rd year was the other big draw, because I am really interested in global health, and specifically like access to care and quality care in a global setting. And I knew coming into medical school that I wanted to do something with global health, either getting a master's in global health or doing research abroad. I mentioned that I spent some time in Brazil with my family. I, while I was there, lived with my aunt who went through like a lot of health issues that just like wouldn't have happened in the US, and I like very much wanted to go back to Brazil and just do some like access to care work there. So I think that having that like time built into the curriculum, so I don't have to take off like my summer, or I don't have to take an extra year if I don't want to, was really, really attractive to me and really valuable. And then for my extracurriculars, I am also on the executive board of LMSA with Alyssa. I serve as one of the recruitment co-chairs. So I meet with incoming medical students that would be part of LMSA that are interviewing at Duke every week, and do basically this, just answer questions, share my experience. I am part of Salud, which is a program for a mentorship program for high school Latinx students in Durham that are interested in healthcare. I'm part of Duke Pride, which is their LGBTQ plus affinity group. What else? Oh, I'm working on a couple of research papers with an OB-GYN lab, which has been really fun. I was like completely not interested in OB-GYN before this opportunity popped up, and now I'm like very seriously considering that as my future career. So that's a lot of fun. I think that's all.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys for those introductions and discussions about Duke. So moving into now the application portion, which everyone is waiting for. I first wanted to ask, is there a specific part of your background or upbringing that was important to bring up on your application that you didn't realize was important until recently? More specifically, in the past sessions, there's been discussion surrounding how do you balance the bringing up experiences you've had on your application versus talking about yourself. Maybe Cameron, you can start us off.
Sure, yeah. So just talking about experiences that you've had and also sharing about yourself. Okay, cool. So one experience that I had that I didn't realize would have been such a large part of my application was I did like a very short stint of science policy writing. And for some reason that ended up being something that a lot of interviewers asked me about, which I was totally unprepared for because I did it for kind of a short period of time. But it was one of the experiences that exposed me the most to more of like the broader picture of healthcare. So how federal policy trickles down and impacts how all of us function within the medical sphere. And I think just being able to demonstrate that you have an understanding of what you're getting into is very, very valuable in this application process, because it is a long road and they want to make sure that you're fully committed and fully understand, what the implications are of choosing this difficult career path. And I also didn't realize how significant my interest in the arts would be in this application process. So I have done like a bit of like sculpting ever since I was young. And that was something that I ended up talking about a lot and kind of like related to my interest in surgery. And I think interviewers just ended up finding like that connection between sculpting and surgery to be kind of interesting. And I didn't even realize it until I like mentioned it briefly. And then I was like, okay, I'm gonna make sure I keep using this like metaphor moving forward. But I think when you're talking to interviewers about your experiences, I would always try to highlight like why I was attracted to that experience in the first place. Like, what are my interests, what are my values, and how did those align with whatever this opportunity was. And I think as you're like looking for activities to add to your resume, using your values and your genuine interests to drive what you choose to spend your time on is going to make your life a lot easier during the interview season, because you can speak genuinely and passionately about your experiences. So I like explaining what my motivations were and going into some kind of activity, and then also talking about the lessons that I learned from it, even if they weren't necessarily, even if it was like a failure. Like I talked about how a huge chunk of my time in my research lab was not necessarily a failure, but did not go as planned. But I ended up talking about like how much I learned from that, just about the nature of research. And so, kind of cliche, but definitely go into detail about lessons learned from your activities. But I think the motivation part is the one that's not as harped on, but is a great opportunity to reveal more about yourself. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you. Maybe Gabby, you can answer that question as well.
Sure. Just to clarify, when you asked like about experiences versus writing about yourself, is that like for us to answer or like advice for the listeners?
Just in general, I'm just wondering, so a couple people started emailing me saying in personal statement writing, they weren't sure how to balance talking about like research they've done or other activities they were interested in versus talking about like a family story that like really impacted them growing up and why they wanted to go into medicine.
Sure. Okay, I gotcha. Okay, so starting off with what my experiences that showed up in my medical school application, I think the biggest one for me was just kind of like, it wasn't like an experience, it was more like my background, because my background is really pretty weird. My mom is from Brazil. She came to the US in her 20s, and she's a physician in the US, but did all her training in Brazil, and then came to the US and had to like redo a bunch of her training in order to be a physician here. And then my dad is a farmer from rural Iowa. And as you can imagine, they're very different. And I think just kind of going back and like looking at the experiences that I had growing up, because I grew up in this in this like weird and kind of chaotic family, and like how they impacted my perspective and like how I relate to other people was probably the biggest thing for me to show on my application, because then a bunch of the experiences that I ended up highlighting during my application cycle came from that, either directly or indirectly. So for example, living in Brazil was a big one that I talked about a lot, and especially living with my aunt who was in remission for leukemia and ended up having a relapse while I was there. And like all of that was like very, I guess, impacted by like the perspective that I grew up with, and like the different cultures and just like ideologies. So that was big on my application. And then I would say though that like anything, and this kind of goes into like the second part of the question, which is like, do you focus more on yourself or more on your experiences? I would say like, think about which experiences impacted your perspective, and write about like the strongest personal statements are going to have your experiences in them, but they're not just going to be like rehashing what happened in whatever the experience was. It's talking about like what is the experience, but then how did it impact you? And I think that like just in general, focusing the most on what you learned, how you changed your perspective, just like any impact that it had on you or any impact that you had on other people, like focusing on that, but using your experiences to show those things, I think is the best way to go about writing your application.
Well, thank you. That's great advice. Maybe Sage, you can follow up next.
Yeah, I don't know if I can say it much better than Gabby did, but I would say, like, for me, a big part of what I emphasized in my application was also my background, and because I also come from a small town in North Carolina, so I grew up on a farm and had a kind of weird background, and talked a lot about the challenges I faced coming from that kind of background, and that was something that came up a lot in my applications. I think eventually was something that helped me kind of differentiate myself from the general applicant pool. So I think if you do have something like that, do yourself a service, and if you feel comfortable talking about it, I think it only serves to make the admissions committee see what it is about you that makes you unique, because I think it is really hard to stand out in the general applicant pool. And so if I think I had to even take time reflecting on what it was that made me unique, and that's one of the hardest things I think in application cycles. How do you contribute to diversity? What makes you unique? And I think the way Gabby said, you really want to focus on talking about what it is you gained or what you contributed to the experience. I think is the most important thing. I think I got advice to spend 66%, 2/3 of the essays talking about how I was impacted by it or the impact I had through the experience, and maybe 1/3 of it talking about what I actually did. Because I don't know if this is harsh to say, but it felt true to me at the time when I was writing applications. A lot of what we do as pre-meds are very similar experiences. But that doesn't mean that the experience you gain from it isn't unique. So I think spending more time talking about the unique experience that you had and what you gained from it, how it changed you, how you impacted the people you worked with is really important. So I think showing that, not just saying it, but showing it is really important. Using examples, talking about specific, experiences is really good and makes your personal statement much stronger. Was there any other part of the personal statement question that I wasn't answering? I was answering questions in chat, so I don't know if I caught all the.
Oh, you're good. Thank you. And maybe Alyssa, you can wrap it up with a specific part of your background or upbringing that was important for the application that you didn't realize.
Yeah, I think so like I alluded to earlier, I had a full-time job during undergrad. I worked the entire year, most of the year, over 20 hours a week. So it was definitely a lot to balance, not just working, but also your coursework and also keeping up with extracurricular activities, because we were all pre-meds once, and we know what that means. And I think for me, my job took on a big part of my interviews, specifically just asking how I balanced everything. What did I do? Why was it important to me? And I think the biggest question that it's often eludes people in terms of application is the why. You really have to get to the why of things, like Sage mentioned, doing that personal reflection, because it helps you answer the questions that matter. For me, I had to have a job. And so they always ask me like, why did you decide to do pre-med knowing that you had all of this other stuff to do? And why was medicine important? And those questions you really have to have a good answer to, because at the end of the day, like all this hardship and strife and hard work means nothing if you don't know why you're doing it, and that you use your why to guide you in the direction that you hope to go in. So that was a huge part of my interview process. Another important thing that I would say is I was a caregiver for my grandfather before he passed away, and that was a big part of my personal statement. And I used that and connected it with my interests, which lie in dance, and kind of combined both of them into my personal statement. So I would definitely say that for your personal statement and your activities, as long as it's important to you and you're able to communicate why that's important to you and why that makes you unique, then it deserves to be on your application. I would never tell you or tell anyone to not include music or arts or things like that that make you who you are and make you happy for the sake of making an application better for a school. No. If that's who you are and if that's something that's really important to you, definitely include it. Just realize that that helps you differentiate yourself from the next person, and also it helps inform who you are and why you are where you are at.
Well, thank you. I think that's a perfect segue into more about the experiences on the application, because echoing what you said and talking about music and arts, you should still do those things, but I want to hear more about, those specific examples and how you express them. So a lot of times students believe that you need to cover the big three: research, clinical experience, and shadowing to get into medical school. And I think sometimes the most important experiences are those that are not medically related, but show other character traits that you're interested, like Cameron was talking about art. So I was wondering if you can expand on this and describe one experience that wasn't medically related, but that you believe was integral to your personal growth and application process. In addition, I want to acknowledge that not all students have access to medically related experiences. So I want to highlight how there are other experiences that you can have that might be equal to or more important than, research you did in undergrad. And maybe Alyssa, you can start us off.
Yeah, I would say that non-medically related experience would definitely have been my job. I mean, I was a seamstress for the football team at the University of Florida for 3.5 years. And that's as far away from medicine as you could possibly get. And it was, I was part of a team, and that's a very important skill for medical school, learning how to work in a team and be a part of something greater than yourself. So that's definitely wasn't medically related. I would say also in terms of art, I was part of a dance team at school. I was part of Sabor. It was a Latino dance team, and that was definitely an important part of my first year. And then I was also in a sorority, and I included that on my application. I was an executive member of my sorority. I traveled to national conferences, and really enjoyed as much as possible my university experience. For me, I'm the first in my family to go to college, let alone graduate with a bachelor's degree, a master's degree, and let alone go to medical school. So, mentioning that I did all of these things in undergrad was important to me because I'm the first to ever do it. So definitely those were all like unmedically related things. And sure, I mean, I had the big three that you described, but it's not always easy to get all of them, and you can get them in unconventional ways. I know that one friend I had who is currently at Vanderbilt's medical school, she did a lot of counseling of like suicide prevention counseling over the phone or online. And that's something that students, I feel like, may be able to do and access now during COVID. Just some suicide prevention hotline work, which is very valuable and important. And it may be accessible. Maybe it's not traditional in terms of clinical experience, but I think that could work. I'll pass it on to Gabby now.
I love this question. I think that medical experiences are some of the best ones to put on your application, because they are going to be the ones that differentiate you the most and like make you unique and make you stand out. Because at this point, I mean, it's obviously like much more difficult with COVID, but you know, before COVID, most people, excuse me, oh my goodness, most people had done at least some shadowing, at least some research to like kind of check the boxes. And so unless you did something in research or shadowing that was like super extensive and like way beyond like what the like normal or average medical school applicant would have done, it's not going to really differentiate you. I feel like when I was applying, the like admissions people kind of, I don't want to say like looked at it like a checkbox, because I don't think that that's fully true, but I think in some ways it could be seen a little bit like that. Like it's something that you need to have, but it's not something that's necessarily going to like really make you stand out in your application. Whereas I think if you have like unique experiences, like I was super involved in music. Like I actually almost went into music professionally before I like did a complete 180 and decided to go into medicine. And then during my gap year, I worked as, I worked in a restaurant. I actually had 2 or 3 jobs at like all times, but I worked in a restaurant and I worked at an education nonprofit. And I think that like those things, as long as you think about those parts of your life and of your experiences and like kind of tie them into medicine, not necessarily into medicine specifically, but like into skills that will apply to medicine. I think that that is super, super, super powerful in your application. And it really makes you stand out. And it also makes you look very thoughtful, because it shows that you're thinking about like what skills you need to be a good doctor, and like reflecting on how like the other aspects of your life have given you those skills. So like, just for example, like I was a musician for a very long time, and that because of that, I often put myself in a place where I was like seeking out criticism, which is something that's really big in medicine. Is you're always evaluating yourself, evaluating each other, being evaluated by peers, by faculty, by everybody. And it's just not something that everybody has experience with. Like some people don't get a lot of criticism before medical school, whereas like I'm very used to it because it's just like what I was doing like every day. So I made a big point of highlighting that in my application, and a lot of I got a lot of positive feedback from that.
Well, thank you so much. That was super helpful. Maybe Sage, you can go next.
Yeah, I agree with Gabby that sometimes your non-medical experiences can sometimes be the ones that differentiate you the most and show where your passions lie outside of medicine, which I think is a really important part of the application process. I think for me, something that helped me a lot in my applications that I was able to talk a lot about in my interviews and essays was when COVID had kind of just first started, when I was beginning the application process. And around that time, I had founded a mental health peer support program on campus, because I recognized that it was, the pandemic and going online was affecting a lot of my classmates very negatively as far as mental health goes. So it was kind of a way to address something that I didn't feel was being adequately addressed on campus. And I think being able to talk about that kind of leadership experience and learning how to take initiative and work with other people and do something together was important in a lot of ways. And I believe Gabby and Alyssa both mentioned this, that it's really important to think about how the skills you gain from these experiences, how they translate to the kind of doctor you want to be and the skills that you'll need to be a successful physician. And I think that is a very important part to stress in your application, if not being explicitly asked of you multiple times through interviews and essays. So I think, again, self-reflecting a lot while you're doing these experiences and asking why you're doing them to yourself is really important, and it will pay dividends when you're actually having to talk about it explicitly on your application. But yeah, I think being able to talk about the skills that you gained, again, back to a similar question earlier, the skills that you gained and how you made an impact and those kind of things are all really important. And I think it also is obvious when you're doing something just to check a box and when you're doing it because you're passionate about it, like that was a project I was really passionate about, and I still am involved in, now that I'm in med school to some extent. So I think, med schools like to see that you are a passionate individual and that you have the drive and the desire to identify a problem and find a way to fix it. And I think it's even more relevant now that it's much harder to come by clinical experiences. I think it's really nice to be able to show that you can take whatever resources you have available to you in a difficult time and hopefully try to make some kind of positive impact out of that, in whatever way that you can, given the limited constraints that we're facing right now. So I think given the lack of access to shadowing and things like that, is really important to try and find ways you can still have a positive impact on your community and show that in medical schools. Yeah.
Oh, thank you. And maybe Cameron, you can finish this off.
Yeah, I think the points everyone made already are pretty good and robust, but I guess I'll speak a little bit to finding something to do during COVID, because I couldn't really access any building health related. Like I was on campus when COVID-19 was really hitting the fan. I mean, as it still is, but when we were in pretty strict quarantine, and I had no idea what to spend my time on. I was completely lost because I will admit the majority of my resume is very sciencey and medicine related. That was like what I was used to because I was genuinely very just passionate about it. So I ended up like talking to like older mentors or just reaching out to med students and seeing what they were up to and basically just begging them to let me be a part of their projects. Like, oh, you have this organization, let me run your social media, like let me make the graphics for you. Like, oh, you need to do like nonprofit paperwork, I'll do it for you. Like just offering to do any tasks that can be completed remotely. And then that ended up being like really awesome windows into these like interesting organizations. Like one of them was the COVID-19 Health Literacy Project that kind of was translating COVID-19 related information into a bunch of different languages. And I managed their social media. And like through that, I was able to see kind of this like national network of leaders, like student leaders across the nation, like through like Zoom meetings and phone calls. And that ended up being like a really robust experience. And it was all stuff that I was doing from my couch. So that was really valuable. And I think also taking advantage of your secondaries and your personal statement to talk about those kinds of experiences that were super meaningful and impactful for you, but you don't really know how to put that in like an experience box. Like a lot of people mentioned their background, and if that was like, a family is huge, like super important to you, and you spend a lot of time with your family, and that's just like, a big part of who you are, you can't really put that in your experiences list. So like take advantage of those other like short essay spaces to talk about, things that are really meaningful to you that can't really fit into a box very well. I think that's something that I really took advantage of, especially being able to talk about kind of pivotal experiences in my life that didn't happen during undergrad, because that's a huge rule that we kind of heard is like, don't list stuff from like high school or before that in your experiences list. So I like took advantage of secondaries a lot to talk about like, I guess just more formative experiences that happened in my like personal life a while ago. So really using all the space that you have on the application and not like worrying that you can't fit it on the primary, because I promise you'll have like a bunch of opportunities to talk about pretty much anything you want to through secondaries later on.
Well, thank you. I think that's fantastic advice, thinking about, what you said with what Gabby said about taking, an experience that you don't think ties to medicine, like music, and how you said seeking out criticism. I think that just shows like how much reflection it takes to really take any experience you've had in your life and really pinpoint, what it means to you. So thank you. I'm going to pass it on to Ashini now, who's going to ask a couple more questions. I'm being cognizant of the time, so take it away.
Okay, hi everyone. So our next question has to do with gap years. So I know Alyssa and Gabby both took gap years, and Alyssa, you got your master's before that, I believe. So if you guys can speak about why you chose to do a gap year and what influenced your decision, as well as what you did during your gap year and how that contributed to your application. Alyssa, if you want to start us off.
Sure. So I decided to do a gap year because the first time I took the MCAT, I bombed it. And I mean, to be frank, the first time I took the MCAT, it was not good. Like below 500, I was in a very poor mental state. And I knew that A, I was going to have to retake the MCAT and kill it. And B, my science GPA was not where I wanted it to be. Having gone to a really large public university, I didn't have the mentorship and the guidance that I wish I had to have developed a better science GPA and etc. So that's what really drove me to do a master's program. I looked into my options and I knew that a post-bac wasn't for me because I had all of the prerequisites. It was more like I needed something to increase my science GPA, and a master's GPA is considered separately on your AMCAS application. So I knew it wasn't going to influence my undergrad GPA, but it was going to be something to make me stand out and better prepare me. And honestly, it was the best decision I ever made. It truly prepared me for medical school. It's given me the confidence that I needed. I was exposed early because of my master's program to clinical time. So I became an EMT during that time. I had some EMT experience then. And then in terms of the year following, because I did have to take a year after that to A, take the MCAT, B, apply, and C, I used it for work, considering you have to apply a year before you enroll. So I worked that year as a research assistant in a startup company in South Florida. It was not very easy to find a job because it was in the midst of COVID happening. But I will say that I was able to find it on LinkedIn. I did search, hospital websites, university websites, traditional job websites, and did find my job that way. And I really, I took the first one I could get because it was the only opportunity that was presented to me, and it ended up working out perfectly. It was critical research experience. I got to travel. And honestly, I grew a lot that year. I learned a lot about myself, and that became crucial to my interviews. They asked me about what I did and why it mattered, what I was doing. And I was able to tell them. And I did a lot of FDA clinical trial work during that time, which is very different to anything I had done before. I had done a lot of bench work in undergrad. So this was very much the clinical research aspect that I had never seen. And I did learn a lot and grow from that. So, doing a gap year is not an easy decision. I don't think it was an easy decision for me, and I don't think it's an easy decision for many people. But I will say that, the trend that I'm seeing in medical schools is more and more people are taking time off before they start medical school. Why? Because you mature a lot out in the real world. And unfortunately, you are going to be treating patients who are out in the real world. And if you've never gone or been hardened by life, like a lot of people that I know, like me, it's valuable to take time off and see what it's like to have a full-time job and to balance that with, potentially having children. And it really, truly helps you relate to your patients and empathize with what they're going through on their day-to-day. Life is not easy, and I think our patients are going through that every day, and one day you will be a patient too. But it is a very strong emphasis, I think, in taking time off and really getting out of the school bubble, because school really could be a bubble sometimes. So definitely that's what I feel. I think Gabby can answer as well.
Yeah, thank you so much. Gabby, please go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I think everything that Alyssa said was definitely spot on. I ended up deciding to take a gap year just because I mean, I mentioned earlier that undergrad was really hard for me, and I really needed a break from school. I am definitely like the type of person that prioritize, or I used to be the type of person anyway, that like prioritized work over my like personal health and well-being. And I needed some time to like reevaluate my priorities and just, you know, grow a little bit personally. Like I think that taking a gap year or more than one gap year really brings a lot of things into perspective that I wasn't necessarily thinking about before. And that's not true for everyone. Sometimes people like have the perspective because of different things in their life. But I think that like Alyssa said, also like just being out in the real world can give you a lot, you know, like I was working at an education nonprofit and I was working at a restaurant, and like that's a that was definitely like a big like period of growth for me and period of learning. And I think that it made me a lot more mature, and it taught me about like what I really wanted to do in medicine. Like, for example, I didn't know that I was interested in global health before I took time off and went to live in Brazil. And I think that that's something that I'm really passionate about now, that I hadn't even really considered before, because before I took my gap years, I was so like entrenched in the machine of like the medical school progression. Like it was like so ingrained in me that you go to undergrad, you major in science, you do some shadowing, you do some research, and then you go to medical school and you like sit in a classroom, and then you go into the hospital, and like what you do is in the hospital. And I think that just like taking time away from that just like showed me like how much more there is to medicine. Like there's so much like community building and like community health that's so important, and just like things like that that really impacted my perspective a lot.
Thank you so much. I wanted to touch on one thing you did say about just like wellness. I think that's really important for students, especially because a lot of us are like you said, very ingrained within that like machine of like we have to do this, this, and this, and then get to medical school. But everyone's timeline is different and everyone's story is unique. And I think that's really important to emphasize. Sage and Cameron, being cognizant of time, I just want to ask if either of you have any advice in terms of not taking a gap year, and why you chose to do that. Just briefly, if you want to speak about that. Sage, if you want to go first.
Yeah, so I don't know if I'm technically considered a traditional student because I went to community college for 2 years, got my associate's degree, and then transferred to UNC. It actually took me 3 years at UNC to graduate because not all of my community college credits transferred. So I had to take a little bit more time than I was expecting. So in total, it took me 5 years to graduate with a bachelor's degree. And I applied to medical school during that final year of college. So technically I went straight through, but I did have to take an extra year of undergrad to do that. And I think that is somewhat common for people that transfer from community college. As far as my decision, I initially planned to take a gap year just because I thought there was no way I'd be able to take the MCAT and do all the planning and things it takes to apply. But then COVID happened going into my senior year, and I was already planning to take the MCAT the summer before my senior year, and they were pushing the MCAT deadline back. And so I was like, maybe I'll try applying and see how it goes. So I was actually writing my primaries and secondaries while studying for the MCAT. And then I took the MCAT in August, which I really don't recommend doing if you can at all avoid it, because it was really difficult time-wise, but it did fortunately work out. So as far as the reason I decided to not take a gap year and go through with applying, even though that wasn't my original plan, was more of just, I felt ready to start medical school. I was really excited about medical school, and I didn't really have any clear plans of what I would do during a gap year. It was more just, I felt I needed to take a gap year out of necessity, just timing wise, and less of out of desire. And I think a lot of people have really great reasons for taking a gap year, or want to just have time off or do certain experiences. And I think that's great, and you definitely should. And as I believe Alyssa said earlier, it's probably becoming the norm now to take a year off. But if you're like me and probably like Cam and just kind of excited to get started and don't have any kind of clear reasons why you want to take a gap year, and you don't feel the necessity to do it for any reason on your application, I I'd say go for it. And so far I've enjoyed it, and I'm happy to have gone straight through, if you can consider that going straight through. Yeah, so far no regrets for my decision, but I can also see that it would be beneficial from a mental health perspective to take some time off as well. So take all those things into consideration and kind of decide what works best for you.
Awesome, thank you. Cam, if you have anything to add very briefly.
Yeah, like Sage said, I think unless you have a very clear vision of what exactly you want to achieve during your gap year, then don't force yourself to take it just because you feel like you should. I know at my school it's really common for people to take gap years, so I was kind of like, oh, well, what am I gonna do? Like trying to figure out what I would do for a gap year, but then I realized like, why, if I don't have something clear that I really want to do more than start med school right now, then I mean, if med school is what I want to do right now, then I should just start it now. And there's also something else I wanted to say, but I kind of lost my train of thought. But it looks like it's 2 now, so we don't have to wait for my neurons to start firing off.
No worries. Thank you. So I do want to move on to our final question, because it is 2 o'clock. But so my final question is, if you guys could go back in time and do anything differently, what would you do differently? And if you wouldn't do anything differently, do you have any last minute advice for our attendees? Gabby, if you want to start.
I don't think I would do anything differently. I guess my advice would be do your research. Really do your research on like what the schools are that you're applying to. Don't get too stuck on stats, because while they are very important, there's a lot more that goes into your application. And for the rest of what goes into your application, do a lot of thinking, like really like think about, like, this is just kind of a theme for this webinar, I guess, but like thinking and reflection are just key. Like think about what you want to share with the admissions, like what you want them to learn about you, and then use your experiences to show those things. And I think that if you can do that, then like your personality will come through, your experiences will come through, like your unique perspective will come through, and your like thoughtfulness will come through, and those are all really important.
Awesome, thank you so much. Sage, if you want to go next.
I can't think of anything specific off the top of my head, besides maybe being a better student in high school and not having to go to community college, but it all worked out in the end. I think, yeah, being more reflective earlier on would have probably been helpful for when it came time to write applications and essays. I know some people keep like journals and things like that to kind of keep a note of their thoughts and the way they feel about things as they happen when they're in undergrad and doing experiences. And I think that's really valuable. So when it does come time to write, those dreaded secondary essays, you can go back and actually see the thoughts that you were having at that time and reflect. And I think that's an awesome thing. And I wish I would have done that more in undergrad, to just, kind of keep a journal of how I was feeling and what I was thinking, and the different experiences I had. So maybe if I could go back and give any advice, it would be that, that piece of advice.
Awesome, thank you. That's great advice. Cameron, if you want to go next.
Yeah, I think don't forget to live your life for you is a big take-home message that I want to leave you guys with. I've seen a lot of people whose like cycles didn't work out, and then they looked at the previous like 4 years of college as if like none of it was worth it, because it was all just for admissions and not like for your own self and your own like memories. And so that's something that I would want to do earlier on in college. I remember at one point I had a meeting with my advisor because I was just exhausted and just feeling kind of unfulfilled, and she told me to just drop everything I wasn't passionate about. I stopped volunteering at this one hospital that had like a wait list for volunteers, so I knew that it would be fine. Like they weren't gonna miss me sitting in the lounge not doing anything, because there's like never anything to do. And I was like, why am I doing this? I'm literally just doing this for my resume, and it's not really having a big impact. And so once I like kind of cleared my slate of things that I that didn't make me tick and started really seeking out more like passion projects, that's when A, my resume got a lot more interesting, and B, I just felt way more fulfilled in my own life and didn't feel like I was just living for like how I was going to be portrayed on a piece of paper for an application. So yeah, don't be afraid to prioritize yourself and your interests, because this is your life. So not to get all philosophical on you guys.
No, that's great advice. Thank you. And Alyssa, to finish this off.
Yeah, I strongly believe that if one door closes, another door will open. And I'm of the belief that everything I went through before coming to medical school was important because it was the reason why I'm here. And I wouldn't value my position and where I'm at if it wasn't for all the experiences I had. I will say that some things I did in undergrad, such as I kept my resume always up to date, because I wanted to make sure I kept track of everything I was involved in, came the day I wanted to apply, and that seemed very helpful. During my master's program, I had a journal and I really used it a lot introspectively, thinking about what mattered to me, why it mattered. And when it came time to write my personal statement and to write secondaries, I didn't necessarily refer to it exactly, but I had some reflection that I had done not too long ago that I could feed off of. I will say that a lot, like Cam was saying, this is your life. Do what you like to do. At the end of the day, that is what will be more important than anything. Doesn't matter what advisors or I say or we say. What matters to you is what matters most. And if you can portray that in an application, then you will be set. You'll be fine. So if there's any questions, feel free to email us. I know that we all included our emails in the chat. We do have an exam tomorrow, so please don't expect an email before tomorrow. But happy to be a resource to anyone. And if we don't have the answer, I know that we can find someone that does. So just know that we are part of a class of 124. And we are very interconnected with the classes above us as well. There's really good mentorship within Duke's University. So if we don't have the answer, we can find it for you. So we wish you all the best. Good luck.
Well, thank you guys so much for taking the time out of your day and having an exam tomorrow to participate and share your stories, both personal and professional advice. I know I've learned so much from this session, and I hope everyone has enjoyed this opportunity as well. Your presence here will help guide so many students into a successful STEM career. Please note that a recording of this webinar will be available on the Discord soon. And I look forward to interacting with everyone on the STEM Potential Discord and setting up additional events. We're now going to take a brief 2-minute break. And next will be the Harvard session. So stay tuned. But thank you all so much again for joining today. Talk soon.